Hello, everyone. I'm Jamie Gallagher, and I'm an engagement trainer and consultant. I work with universities, charities, museums all around the world, looking at how they connect with people and institutions outside of their organization. And often that means helping them to talk about their work, but increasingly helping them to evaluate their work. I'm a massive evaluation geek. I love it. I think it's fascinating, and hopefully you will too. It's certainly an incredibly important part of the public engagement process. The first thing I want to say about evaluation is that it is so much more than a survey. It's not just a survey that's given out at the end of an event. Evaluation at its core is a structured way of listening to people. And any way that we can listen to people and get information from them is a valid way of evaluating our public engagement. Now, if you have come across me before, I run lots of different training sessions, you will know that I like to explain things through TV, film, analogy. It's the way I make sense of the world, and it's the way I'll be guiding you through evaluation. So I want you to imagine, as we start our exploration of the topic, that you are no longer a researcher. Instead, you are Luke Skywalker. Just go with me here. You're Luke Skywalker sitting down with Princess Leia to discuss what is going to happen over the next year or so. We are going to look at Star Wars, an evaluation plan. Let's think about what we need to consider. They cut this part from the film, I'm not sure why. It's important to consider right at the start of your project the aim. What are we trying to do? Well, if you're Luke Skywalker, then your aim is to blow up the Death Star. Clarity of purpose, incredibly important. Now, we need to know how we're going to achieve this as well. So we also need a project method. And in Star Wars, we're going to fire torpedoes into the exhaust port. So this is how we will achieve our aim. Then evaluation creeps in. What is our marker of success? A marker of success is something that we're able to point to, demonstrate, that shows we've achieved our aim. And very often, a marker of success is very closely related to that initial aim. In fact, here, it's just a rewording of the aim. We're aiming to blow up the Death Star. Our marker of success is a Death Star which has blown up. Now, to make this into an evaluation plan, we need one other element. We need an evaluation method. And in Star Wars, the evaluation method is direct observation. Han Solo sits in the Millennium Falcon near enough to the Death Star so that he can look out his window and see that it's blown up. So this is how we would report on it. We set out to blow up the Death Star, and we have blown up the Death Star as directly observed by Han Solo in the Millennium Falcon. And these are some of the most important elements that we need to consider for our evaluation planning. Aims through to markers of success and how you're going to observe them. And when it comes to setting aims, I'm not going to go into that in any great detail. Hopefully, you've thought about the aims of your engagement before you enter that space. But I do want to give you some suggestions on aim setting, and that is to have multiple aims. Multiple aims actually help your project be easier to evaluate than one large overarching aim. I'll give you an example. I often encounter researchers who want to inspire the next generation of researchers. Brilliant, noble, almost impossible to demonstrate success on. If your only goal is to inspire the next generation, it's going to be very difficult to write a report on that. You have to stay with people for years to see what paths they follow. Now, this doesn't mean that we can't set out to try and inspire people, but it's going to help our evaluation if we have other objectives as well. For example, we could set out to speak to 5 schools from lower socioeconomic areas, to speak to 150 pupils who didn't know this was an active area of research, to give people an informative experience, to give people an enjoyable experience. Now, these are much more measurable. We can count the schools that we go to. We can count the pupils and ask them about their knowledge. We can ask if they've had an enjoyable time, and we can test them to see what they've learned. And if these things collectively are true, then we can tell a story as to how we're contributing to a culture of inspiration by taking research to places where it hadn't been before, by connecting to people who didn't know this was a possible career path, and providing that enjoyable and informative experience. So multiple aims make our evaluation easier to plan. And I want to give you an example. But before we get to an example, I want to define three terms for you: impact, outcomes, and outputs. Impact you can think about as an overarching change, an umbrella term. Outcome, you can think about that as a mini impact, something which is different, and that sits under that umbrella of impact. Outcome, you can think about that being a product of your initiative. Let me give you an example that will help clarify these. Let's think about school. Let's imagine school is an in-depth engagement process where pupils enter around aged 5 and they go through an intense multi-year process to emerge well-educated, socially connected individuals ready for an independent path. Let's think about impacts, outcomes, and outputs for that. The impact, I've kind of told you, it's that well-educated, socially connected individual who's ready for an independent path. But I want to ask you what you think the outcomes of the schooling system might be. I want you to think about this and I want you to put in the chat box. What are some of the mini impacts or things which are different through the schooling system? Any ideas? Tell me in the chat box. So the impact is that well-educated individual. What are some of the outcomes of the schooling system? Put in the chat box if you've got an idea. Okay, exam results. Ability to do fractions. I like it, Lida. Yes. More knowledge. Yes. Literacy. Good. Life skills. Yes. Make friends. I would tweak that slightly to yes, as we just seen in the chat box. The social connections. These are very good answers. So impact, well-educated, socially connected individual. Outcomes, we tend to look at them in subject-specific ways. Imagine you go to a parents' night. You don't just meet a teacher who says, your child is now smarter. Instead, you'll visit the English teacher who will say the pupil is more, has a better understanding of English language. You'll go to the maths teacher who will say the child is better at maths. We look at individual changes in knowledge and understanding as related to subjects. We might also look at the social connectivity of that child. So impact, overall change, outcomes, things which are different. Outputs, if you're a parent, you might have some outputs decorating your walls, the paintings that are produced, the essays that are written. These are things that we create along the way. The child writes 5 essays, the outcome of which is the child is more proficient in use of English language. The impact is that contribution to that well-educated, socially connected individual. The child forms 3 friends. Outputs. Outcome, the child is more socially connected. Impact, that contribution to that well-educated, socially connected individual. By separating out the 3 of these, it can help our planning a lot. Let me show you how the charity sector uses this to develop an evaluation plan. I want to introduce you now to the CES planning triangle. This stands for the Charity Evaluation Services Planning Triangle, and it has 3 distinct elements. At the top of the triangle, we put impact. In the middle, we have outcomes, and at the base, we have outputs. I want to give you a project-specific example that I worked on. So I worked with a visual impairment charity in the west of Scotland, and we had a project which sought to make visually impaired people feel less isolated. That was our impact, the overall change that we wanted to achieve. To achieve that, we also articulated several outcomes, things which we wanted to be different. Here are the outcomes. We wanted to make sure that visually impaired people were better connected to other visually impaired people. We wanted to make sure that people had a greater understanding of the support services that were available to them. And we wanted to make sure they were empowered to make independent journeys. Now, hopefully, you can see that if someone is better connected, understands support available to them, and is empowered to make independent journeys, these three things collectively lead to that person being less isolated. So the outcomes lead to the impact. The outputs, the things that we created. We had a buddy scheme established, pairing individuals up together. Large print information leaflets were produced and disseminated, and we had one-to-one support sessions focused on travel. And hopefully you can imagine that if we have a buddy scheme established, people become better connected. Large print information leaflets are giving people a better understanding of support that's available to them. And if we have one-to-one support sessions focused on travel, that will empower people to make independent journeys. Outputs lead to outcomes. Outcomes lead to impact. And against each of these points that we've added, we can add in a marker of success, a Death Star which has blown up. So let's imagine that we want to look for a marker of success associated with people being better connected. I'll give you a clue. This was done quite simply. I asked a single question. What question could we ask of people that would demonstrate whether or not they had more connections than they had before? What could we ask people? What would our marker of success be? Any ideas? Put in the chat box. So I want to demonstrate that visually impaired people are better connected to other visually impaired people. How could I do that? And I did it quite simply. Give you a bit more of a clue. Do you feel better connected? I like it. Yes, we certainly could do that. And Deborah, very, very close to exactly what I asked them, echoed there by Emma. Exactly what I did. At the start of the project, when I interviewed people, I asked them how many other people living with visual impairment did they know? Average answer, 2. At the end of the project, after 9 months, I went back to them and I said, how many people living with a visual impairment do you know? Average answer, 6. And this was one of the markers of success that we used against this. We claimed that people had formed more connections, and we demonstrated that at the start, they had an average of 2 connections. By the end, they had an average of 6. Quite simple. And you should be able to go through all of your outcomes and all of your outputs and have markers of success associated with each of them. If you don't identify a marker of success associated with them, then that's going to be a really challenging report to write. This will help focus down on the information that you need to gather. I'll just pause there because that's quite a lot of information to throw at you and ask if there are any thoughts, comments, or questions so far on the planning of your evaluation from a strategic point. Any thoughts, comments, or questions so far? Okay, we'll carry on. Do feel free to drop questions or comments in the chat box at any point. I'll keep checking as we go. Just to round off this CES planning triangle, impact, outcomes, and outputs. Impact is something we demonstrate. Outcomes, normally something that we measure, and outputs, something that we record. By demonstrate impact, what I mean is that we build such a robust case with our evidenced outcomes and outputs that no one is left in any doubt that we have achieved that overall mission. So something like inspiring people is difficult to show with a question, but if we have built up all of our outcomes and outputs, people will be convinced that we have inspired people. Just in the same way that I built up a case to convince people that I had made people feel less isolated. The next area I want to take you into is the evaluation domains. Now, you won't find these in any textbooks. This is just how I understand my approach to evaluation. I see 4 distinct areas that we want to capture information from people. And these are the 4 areas: demographic, evaluation, feedback, and going forward. I'll tell you what each of these are used for. Demographic information is used for understanding the people involved in your project. Who was involved? Evaluation information is about impact. It's about the change that has been fostered, and you're going to use this for reporting. Feedback is about whether or not your interventions are fit for purpose, and this should help you improve. And going forward, that's about future gazing. What should happen next? And this will help you plan in future. So let's take each of these 4 areas in turn and explore them in a little bit more detail. Demographic information: who was involved and why. Let's look at a classic public engagement scenario. A researcher talking to some members of the public. I want to know who the public are. I want to know who the researcher is. And I want to know who the organisers are. The reason I want to know about all of these groups is the family are maybe having a 3-minute interaction, which is unlikely to be life-changing, in all honesty. The researcher is maybe having 50 of these 3-minute interactions. So in terms of changes in thought, knowledge, behaviour, attitude, I'm looking at the researcher because they're learning a lot. And the organiser, well, that maybe represents 200 presenters, 3,000 members of the public, a huge undertaking for them. Who are they? Why did they form this partnership? And are they happy with it? So I need to know about all of the people that are involved in your project. Now, when you're asking demographic questions, it's important to be as inclusive as possible. If we ask, what is your gender? Male, female, other. That's an overtly othering question. This says, if you're option A, we care. If you're option B, we care. If you're something else, go into this opaque box over there. We don't need to know. And it's not very nice. And it's not just a gender question. Imagine how it would feel to tick other when asked about your ethnic background, or your education level, or your income level. It's just not inclusive, and it's easily fixed. We could phrase this question as, what best describes your gender? Man, woman, prefer to self-describe with an open text box, and prefer not to say. The 2 important options: prefer to self-describe and prefer not to say. By allowing people to self-describe, it says we care no matter what your answer. We're not guessing at the answers that might turn up. We're open to all answers. And prefer not to say, that allows people active permission to miss that question. Maybe that's information they don't want to give you, and you don't want to force them to give you that information or have them abandon the entire survey because they think the questions are too personal. So that allows people to progress to the next question without any pressure. We also need to be aware of data security. And although we've left the EU, the government effectively copied and pasted GDPR regulations. So we need to keep people's data safe and secure. In order to do that, we need to follow a few rules. First of all, ask only for information that you require. If you're going to ask people their postcode, that's okay as long as you know why you're asking for their postcode. Don't ask questions by default. Tell them how and where their data will be used. Is it going on a website? Is it going to be tweeted? Is it going to form part of a report? Be transparent. Tell them how long the data will be stored. You can't keep people's responses forever. Do you delete all of the interviews after 6 months? Tell people. Have information on how to withdraw consent if that's possible. If you're capturing images of people and creating a video, releasing it on social media, they might get in touch to say, I'd rather not be part of this anymore. And that's okay. Let them know how they could do that. Or if they're going to be part of a data set that's synthesized and put into a report, they might not be able to withdraw their individual testimony, in which case, let them know. Have contact details for questions right at the start of any comment cards or surveys that you do, so that if anyone has any concerns, they know exactly the named person that they should get in touch with. And the last point, get ethical approval from the university, ? I wish there wasn't a question mark, but there is. I can give you some advice though. If you're planning to publish your evaluation work, you're going to almost definitely need ethical approval. So go to your ethics committee and do a formal proposal. If you're doing what's known as reflective evaluation, where you're listening to people just to inform your own thinking, you probably won't need an ethical review. But trying to avoid an ethics review is pretty unethical. So don't try to avoid it. It's always worth having a conversation with someone on the ethics committee just to say what you're doing, what you're going to ask, and ask if they've got any advice, or if you should be filling in a full proposal. So get in touch. And I'm increasingly hearing positive things. The ethics committees are really helping people. So that is demographic information. Be inclusive, keep people's data safe and secure, and be transparent with what you're asking. Before I move on to the next section, I'll just pause again and ask if there are any thoughts, comments, or questions so far. All quiet, so let's carry on. Let's move to evaluation. And this is where we're looking for change, something which is different. And it effectively boils down to this meme. Situation before, situation afterwards, and how you caused that intervention. To explore this topic, I've got some statements of evidence that I wanted to share with you, and I wanted to collectively rank them. For this, I'm going to use one of the Zoom features. So go with me here. If you look to your toolbar, which should be on screen somewhere, there should be either a little button that says reactions, or you should be able to click the 3 dots and scroll down to reactions. This will bring up a box with different reactions. It will allow you to applaud or give a thumbs up. But what I'm looking for you to find is the green tick and the red cross. And just test that out for me when you find it. So click on reactions and the red tick, the red cross or the green tick, or click the 3 dots and do the same. Good. Most of us have found that. Thank you. I'm going to switch which screen I'm sharing now and take you on to my statements of evidence that we're going to rank. So just give me a second to sort this out. Here we are. So on the left-hand side, I have statements of evidence. I'm going to, one by one, drag them to the right-hand side under your guidance. If you think the statement of evidence that I'm dragging across is stronger than the previous one, then you can click the green tick. If you think it is weaker, worse, you click the red cross. And what we're going to do is collectively rank these statements of evidence from best to worst. I've put one in the middle here to give us a starting block. So the statement I've put in the middle is, following the event, children's drawings reflected a more accurate representation of dinosaur dietary habits. It's going to be our middle statement. So let's start with our first ranking one. Have your mouse poised over the reactions feature. The first statement that we're going to rank is, 9 months after the activity program, 30% of participants continued to use their microfiber washing bag, saving an estimated 5.25 million microfibers entering the water stream. Do you think that is stronger or weaker than following the events, children's drawings reflected a more accurate representation of dietary habits? If you think it is stronger, green tick. If you think it's weaker, red cross. Okay, unanimous on that one. Higher. We like that one better. Let's do another. So let's compare it first of all to, again, the dinosaur dietary habits. And the statement we're comparing is spoke to 257 people at a drop-in science event. Stronger or weaker than the dietary habits? Okay, I'm seeing lots of red crosses, so down it goes. Okay, again, we'll take this center statement and we'll compare 81% of participants pledged to reduce their household energy use by 5% over the next year. Is a pledge stronger than the drawings? Okay, 13 red crosses, so it means it's weaker. Is it stronger than speaking to people at a drop-in science event, or weaker? I like this game. Excellent. And there it goes. Next one. Okay, let's compare it to our last statement. 81% of participants pledged to reduce their household energy. And the statement we're now comparing it against is featured on BBC One to an audience of 89,000 people. Is that stronger or weaker than a pledge? Weaker than a pledge. Weaker than a pledge. Just, if you disagree, I'll slot it in there. Next one, let's compare it to the dinosaur dietary habits in the middle. The Art of the Bacteria exhibition was one of the most popular visiting exhibitions. It drew lots of attention from the visitors, and the museum was delighted with the partnership. Dr. Walker, Director, Riverbank Museum. Okay, weaker than the dinosaurs. Weaker than the dinosaurs. Is it stronger or weaker than the pledge? Okay, weaker than the pledge. Is it stronger or weaker than being on BBC One? Okay, so it seems we're slotting in here. Just a couple more to go. Thank you for doing this. Two more. Let's compare it to our dinosaurs in the middle. Local residents have established an activist group and have begun planting wildflower seeds in a local park to encourage bees to visit. Stronger or weaker than dinosaurs? Okay, more green ticks. So we're in there. And then the last one. So again, let's compare it to dinosaur dietary habits. In fact, let's just compare it to the closest analogous one, which is the Dr. Walker's testimony. So the last one I'll ask you to rank. The most interesting event I've been to for a long time. Absolutely fascinating. Mrs. Costello, audience member. Okay, so we like that a little bit better than Dr. Walker. So let's drop that one in there. Thank you for that. So now we have our ranking order. And this, as an evaluation consultant, is what I do quite regularly. Not rank the statements like this, but I'm given a lot of evidence and I try and work out, is this strong evidence? Is this weak evidence? And the first thing I tend to do is try and remove any context from it. And I look at the statement and I ask myself, what does that mean? If we look at the first one, 9 months after the activity program, 30% of participants continue using their microfiber washing bag. So what I'm seeing is a change in behavior, and not just a change in behavior. I'm seeing a sustained change in behavior, and not just a sustained change in behavior. There's also a secondary positive environmental impact. So that is a strong statement. The next one down, local residents establishing an activist group. Again, I see a change in behavior. People are doing something they weren't doing before. Very positive. Children's drawings reflected a more accurate representation of dinosaur dietary habits. I see a change in knowledge. These ones are going to be stronger. We've got changes in behavior, changes in knowledge. As we get down, pledges are often used, but they're often misused. If you ask someone to pledge to do something, it doesn't mean that they'll do it. But that's okay. What we can say is that in that moment, people felt capable and that they wanted to change. And that can be quite powerful. So a pledge isn't an indicator of action, but a pledge is an indicator of inspiration or maybe empowerment. People feel capable of doing something. As we go further down, we've got Mrs. Costello and Dr. Walker. Now, I disagree with you on that one. I would rank Dr. Walker above Mrs. Costello. I'll tell you why. I know who Dr. Walker is. Dr. Walker is in a position of expertise or oversight. And this is important. I don't know who Mrs. Costello is. And this worries me. I'm glad she had a nice time, but who is she? I need to use testimonials in one of two different ways. So I could show that Mrs. Costello is representative. So I could say that 57% of people left a comment about how interesting the event was, as exemplified by Mrs. Costello, who said, most interesting event I've been to for a long time. Or the other way I could use Mrs. Costello's statement is to show who she is. Absolutely fascinating, most interesting event I've been to for a long time. Mrs. Costello, entertainment reviewer, Times newspaper. The difference is, I either show that her comment is representative, or I show that she's in a position of expertise or oversight. And that's the two ways I use testimonials. If I just take it as an individual statement, I don't know who she is, and I don't know if what she experienced matches to anyone else's experience. So tell me who she is, or show me that she's representative. Before I move away from these, again, I'll just pause and ask if there are any thoughts, comments, or questions so far. Deborah, your hand is up. Feel free to unmute and share.
Hi, that was really interesting and fun. Thank you. I guess I'm just struggling a little bit with how important quantitative measures are here. So I get the pledge thing, you can say you're going to do anything, but who knows whether you do it or not. But the fact that there were sort of numbers around that convinced me more than, oh, now the examples have gone, I've forgotten. But, the activist group being set up. Who knows actually how much they're doing or what, and what is that achieving?
So a really interesting point there. Thanks, Deborah. For me, I want to see both. I want to see numbers and I want to see richness of description. I would say that right now, numbers can be used to disguise a multitude of sins. And if you put in a percentage, it's automatically going to convince people a little bit more. Now, they're probably wrong because of that. So I would be looking for, the Mrs. Costello statement, the ideal is that 57% of people, and here's the example. You've got the data and you've also got the flavor. So with that activist group, I might talk about the number of members that group had, how it would compare to other groups. I'd be looking for both of these pieces. So it's not, also you can use qualitative statements to give us quantitative information by translating that into a data set. So I'd be looking for numbers and percentages, ideally for both.
Thank you.
No problem. And yeah, so Ashley's raised an interesting point in the chat box as well. Dr. Walker has potential conflict of interest. Yes, but right now in evaluation, we're not even prepared to address that. We have to work on the assumption that the statements in front of us are truthful. And some universities will even write letters of testimonials for their partners to sign off on. It's just the way we work. So we have to work on the assumption that Dr. Walker is telling the truth, but we do acknowledge that they may have an invested interest in this project. So could Mrs. Costello. I'll tell you who she is. She's my friend's mum. So there you go. Mrs. Costello actually is biased as well. But we don't know that because we didn't know who she was. Okay, let's carry on. And we're going to move around our little wheel to feedback. So evaluation we're using for reporting. Feedback, is our intervention fit for purpose? Was it accessible, inclusive? Did people feel safe? Were people confident asking questions? This doesn't tell me who people are. It doesn't tell me whether or not they learned anything, but it does tell me whether or not my intervention is fit for purpose. Do I produce quality engagement? Standard questions that you might see on any survey. It was the right length. The speaker was good. The slides were clear. Simple things that just says quality. The last of the domains is going forward. This is about future gazing. And so if you gather 100 people together and you're working with them, ask them what they'd like next. This session, for example, we're running a session right now on evaluation, but we could at the end of the session ask, what would you like next? And let's say you all say, we want a session on policy engagement. That doesn't tell me who you are. It doesn't tell me what you've learned. It doesn't even tell me whether or not my session is of quality. But it does allow me to plan for something in future. And I would recommend that all of your evaluation processes try and have an element of each of these four. Understand people, capture impact, gather feedback, and plan for the future. D, E, F, and G. Now, when it comes to reporting on your evaluation, I want to introduce Mount Impact. And Mount Impact is the summit that you climb to demonstrate the value and success of your work. As we climb up the mountain, there are several base camps along the way, and we stop at each base camp. We survey the landscape, record our journey before moving on. So let's start our ascent and think about evaluation reporting. At base camp 1, we ask how an opportunity presented itself. I'll give you an example of this one. The example I've got is Judi Dench. Go with me here. Judi Dench was in Z Cars in the 70s. She was in Jack and Nori in the 80s, and she had her own sitcom series in the 90s. She's now more famous for playing M in the Bond films. Now, had Judi Dench not done Z Cars, not done Jack and Nori, and not had her own sitcom series, but in the early 2000s went to Pinewood Studio, knocked on the door, and said, I hear you're making one of these James Bond films, can I be in it? They would have said no. She got to do what she did because of her prior established experience and expertise. So why were you allowed to do the thing you did? A journalist phones you up and says, could we do an interview with you? You say, yes. Can I just ask how you got in touch with me? And maybe they'll say, we read a piece that you wrote for the conversation, or we saw that you ran an event at that festival. That is a marker of success against that prior activity. So why were you allowed to do the thing you did? Basecamp 2. What did you make or do that didn't exist before? The outputs of your initiative. What exists now that would not have done had you not created it? Basecamp 3. How many people did you interact with and how long for? And crucially, I want both of those pieces of information. Did you interact with 500 people for 3 minutes? Or did you interact with 3 people for 500 minutes? I'm not going to say that one is better than the other, but I need information on both so I can picture what your engagement looked like. So how many people and how long for? Basecamp 4. Did they have a positive experience? Standard feedback questions. You create quality engagement. Basecamp 5. Has there been a change in thought or knowledge? Now, a change in knowledge is easy to visualize. People know something they didn't know before, or they know more about something than they did before. A change in thought, a little trickier to imagine, but a change in thought could be to do with confidence or feeling. For example, the Royal Society of Chemistry did a piece of work that showed that only 43% of women felt confident talking about chemistry. So you could work with those women to increase their confidence. And let's say we got to a point where 67% of women felt confident talking about chemistry. That doesn't mean that they know more about chemistry, but it says that they feel more confident, which is a change in thought as opposed to a change in knowledge. Basecamp 6. Has there been a change in policy? And I rank a change in policy above a change in knowledge because a change in policy often is a change in knowledge compounded with the expressed desire to change. I'll give you an example here. I worked with a researcher from Oxford who looked at compassion in the healthcare system. And what he did was he went to nursing colleges and he ran a seminar on compassion for nurses. The nursing colleges really liked this. They liked it so much they decided that it should be standard practice that all of their nurses should have training in compassion, and they embedded a module into their curriculum. Now, this doesn't tell us that the nurses are more compassionate, but it does tell us that an organisation has looked at our work, our recommendations, and has decided to change their policy and practice because of that, which is a pretty good story to tell. Basecamp 7. We get to the top of Mount Impact and we ask ourselves, has there been a change in behaviour? Have people started doing something, stopped doing something, or are they doing it differently? Now, this is very difficult to foster and very difficult to measure, but if we can, it's going to be a good story. Now, Mount Impact comes with some caveats, important ones. Some of these might not be relevant to your project, and that's okay. You're allowed to miss out base camps, but you're only allowed to miss them out deliberately. I don't want you to get to the end of your engagement journey and look behind you and think, I should have asked that, because it'll be too late. You need to decide in advance what you're asking or what you're not asking. Second important point. You do not have to get to the top of Mount Impact to have done something absolutely fantastic. You can go halfway up and have done something amazing. Imagine you work on vaccines and your goal is to engage with the anti-vax community. It's pretty unlikely that after your first meeting, you're going to put them all on a bus off to the local vaccination centre. And that's okay. If you can get them to a place where they are comfortable talking to you, where they have a positive experience and interaction, that's amazing. That is an impact story. You've taken a hostile group and got them to a comfortable place. Halfway up Mount Impact can be a fantastic story. Don't take the steep road. If you're going to try and claim that you have changed people's behaviour, I'm going to require quite a lot of convincing. You're going to have to show me that there has been positive changes in knowledge or attitude. Tell me that you have created quality interventions. Build up a case to show that people have changed their behaviour. You can't just do it in a single question. So that is Mount Impact and the journey that you might take up it. I would encourage each project to answer as many of those questions as fully as they possibly can. And if you do, that is your impact story. Again, because we reached the end of this little section, I'll pause and ask if there are any thoughts, comments, or questions on Mount Impact. Okay, let's carry on. Next thing I want to mention is about the types of questions that you can ask, because there's a limit to the types of questions you can ask. To check all of your questions, I want to introduce evaluation cares. Again, you won't find this in any textbook. This is just rules that I've come up with to help me ask questions. CARES is an acronym, and it stands for clear, answerable, relevant, equally weighted, and singular. I'll take you through what each of these mean. Clear, first of all. It means that a question needs to be easy to understand. Do you think it's not really important to be in favour of protesting the new runway? What? If we have a complex question, the effort for the respondent is going to go into understanding the question rather than their answer. And we want people thinking about their answer, not about understanding the question. So keep it clear. Do you think it is important to protest the new runway? Then they can answer. The next point, answerable. It needs to be within the ability of the respondent to answer reliably. Let me give you an example. How many vegetables have you eaten in the past 4 months? Who knows? That's problematic in two ways. What counts as a vegetable? How many peas do you need to eat before you've eaten a full vegetable? 4 months. Who can remember? I can't remember what I had for dinner 2 nights ago. 4 months is too big a time period. So what we need to do is we need to bring this into the scope of what someone could answer reliably. On average, how many portions of vegetables do you eat a day? Where a portion is 200 grams, e.g. half a tin of beans. We've done two things. We've narrowed the parameter from 4 months to a day, and we've explained what we mean by vegetable. Relevant. A question needs to be related to what you're trying to achieve. The most commonly asked irrelevant question is, how is the catering at today's event? Now that's nice to ask, but in all honesty, it's unlikely to make it into any form of report. Also, if people really like the sandwiches, they'll tell you. If people really dislike the sandwiches, they'll also tell you. It's probably not worth wasting a survey question on it. Example of a relevant question is difficult to give you because it has to be project specific. But if we were thinking about a relevant question for today's session, I might ask if you now feel more confident in your ability to evaluate public engagement. That would be relevant to what we're trying to achieve. Equally weighted, standard scales and unbiased questions. How would you rate the event? Excellent, very good, good, acceptable, or poor? This is the scale that's used by YouTube and Donald Trump. It's praise fishing. We want you to say good things, and that's why there are 3 good options and 1 bad option. You're not allowed to do this. You need to be fair. How would you rate the event? Very good, good, average, poor, very poor. 2 positive, 2 negative, 1 neutral. Also note that I don't use good and excellent. I don't use poor and bad. I use good and very good, poor and very poor. Standard scales. They're called Likert scales. I should send you a link to some. Give me a second. Just finding a link for you. I'll send the first one that pops up. So you don't need to invent scales for every single project. You can just look at the link in the chat box, which will give you an idea of what the wording should be for each of your ranking projects. Singular. This is a nice easy rule to follow. If you see the word and in a question, an alarm bell should go off. That means you need to check if you're asking one thing or multiple things. It's not that you can't include the word and, but you need to check you're not asking 2 things simultaneously. Do you think Microsoft take do Microsoft and Apple take cybersecurity seriously? What happens if you only know the answer to one? We need to separate these out. Do you think Microsoft takes cybersecurity seriously? Do you think Apple takes cybersecurity seriously? Also, just try saying cybersecurity seriously quickly. Challenging. I've done 2 things here. I've separated out the questions, so they're now 2. I've also added an important little word. Think. Do Microsoft take cybersecurity seriously? do I know? Do I really know what goes on behind closed doors? Probably not. So that's probably not within my competency to actually answer. Do I think Microsoft takes cybersecurity seriously? I can tell you about my thoughts. I can tell you about my feelings. That's an important point in evaluation. And that's also why I said I would ask, do you now feel more confident in your ability to evaluate public engagement? I don't ask, are you now more capable of evaluating public engagement? Because that's actually very difficult for you to assess. That's probably for someone else to suggest. But I can ask you how you think or how you feel. Sneaky little tip there. Last point on evaluation cares. Always include a don't know option. Even if you feel that people definitely know the answer, it's always best to include a don't know. I'll give you an example of when this went wrong. I, an evaluation geek, love doing surveys. And so when Twitter has notifications saying you have been specially selected to answer a few questions, I click right away. And I did this a little while ago. And the question was, which of these do you most associate with horse race betting? William Hill, Bet365, Ladbrokes, Paddy Power. I don't know. I don't know. I just don't have any strong association between betting on horses and any of those franchises. But there isn't a don't know option in the question. I need to answer one of them. So I have two options. Either I click one at random and I dilute any meaningful data that the survey has gathered, or I leave the survey. All because they didn't have a don't know option. If they'd included the don't know option, I could have progressed to the next question, and they might have found that 90% of people don't have a particularly strong association between any of those franchises and horse race betting. But they don't know because I had to leave the survey because they'd poorly formatted their question. I want to test your knowledge now on evaluation cares. I've got a couple of examples and I want you to tell me what's wrong with them. So fingers poised over keyboards. Is Boris Johnson portrayed accurately in the media? Yes, no, or don't know. What's wrong with that question? Tell me. There's a couple of things. Ooh, nice, Ashley, nice. So yes, it should be think. And the reason it should be think is because accuracy, we probably don't know the answer. We can have an opinion, but we're unlikely to have the kind of evidence-informed approach unless we know Boris Johnson personally. And yeah. So we've got which media? Exactly. The Guardian, The Telegraph, Twitter, BBC News. So this falls down on two particular areas. We can't answer we can't answer reliably because we don't actually know what accurate is. Great point that we could say, do we think? Then we could make it a little bit more answerable. But also the media, really problematic. It's a broad term, and just like vegetable, we need to define it. Next question. When you take into account their low pay, short-term contracts, and huge skill set, would you agree that PE staff are undervalued? Yes or no? What's wrong with that question? So on the singular, it's good that the alarm bell has gone off, but I would still be happy calling this a singular question. The reason I'm happy calling it a singular question is because it's asking only about value. It is asking you to take multiple factors into account, but it is only asking about value. So I'm actually okay with the singular part here. But yes, we've got a couple of important points there. It's leading. I am forcing you to think about a particular way, presenting my argument within the question. So that's unfair. It's absolutely leading. It's a biased question. There's no don't know option as well. So are people able to answer competently to this question? Unless they know about pay and contracts and skill set, they probably can't answer. There's one other point with this question as well. PE staff. Now, the world I work in, I know exactly what I'm meaning. Public engagement. If I had to stop someone on the street and say, are PE staff undervalued? They would probably think of their PE teacher in school. Don't use acronyms in questions. They can easily be misunderstood. People should all have all of the information they need in a question to be able to give the answer. So I would say that public engagement staff are undervalued. So this falls down in a few ways. It's not answerable because we probably don't know all of the information, and there's no don't know option. And it's not equal, it's not unbiased. It's leading you towards answering in a particular way, which is problematic. Now, since you're good at this, I wasn't going to, but since you're good at this, I'm going to give you one more example. This is a tough one. It'll take a little bit of explaining. Also, this sits outside the evaluation cares. This is going deeper into the world of questions. This was part of a project that was done a few years ago. And a museum hired someone to ask why people had not visited a museum. The question was asked in two ways. First of all, people were asked, have you visited a museum in the past 12 months? If they said no, they were then asked, why have you not visited a museum in the past 12 months? And it was a free text response. A free text response meant that people wrote in comments. These comments were then coded, grouped into common themes. The common themes were that 83% of people didn't have time. 43% of people said there wasn't a museum nearby. 21% of people said they weren't really interested. And 12% had a mix of other reasons. Now, yes, it adds up to more than 100%, which is absolutely fine, because some people gave more than one answer. Some people might have said, I don't have time, and I'm not interested anyway. So that's why the responses can add up to more than 100% without any problem. But there's something else wrong with what I'm showing you. What's wrong here? Sorry, Lida, yes, the other was a free text box. So I've coded it into other. So I have othered people's responses. So these were responses which didn't fit any of the one main category. So people did write their full answer. It's just that I've not presented them as one of the most common themes. Excludes people who have visited. That's okay. We filtered them out in the previous question. So it does exclude it accusation. Yeah, so it does kind of accuse people. It's not worded very nicely, but there's something more fundamental. What would the possible solutions be for that? Okay, we're dancing around the area. I'll ask you another question. Do you believe them? We asked 2,000 people, and 83% of people said they didn't have time. Do you believe them? Okay. So maybe there was responses that they didn't want to say. I don't believe that they didn't have time. I think that a museum visit maybe takes 3 hours. And I think 12 months is a very long time. And I think even the busiest of persons could have found 3 hours in a year. They haven't, and that's okay. I don't mind that they didn't go to a museum. But what we're seeing here is people lying. They're giving the easiest possible response. Why have you not done this? I've not had time. And the problem with this is the question that we're asking. Why? Why is a massive question. Why someone does or doesn't do something is huge. Why did you study this at university? It's a mix of factors. Why did you visit this museum? It's a mix of factors. We can't just expect every piece of information to be boiled down to one answer. Why is a research topic. So if the museum want to know why people have not visited the museum, that is a whole piece of work. And we can't just go and ask it in one singular question because it's too big a question. So what we do is we break it down. We as researchers ask ourselves, why have people not visited a museum? And then we start to ask multiple questions to try and answer that question. So what I would do if this was me and the museum comes to me and they say, we want to know why people aren't visiting, I would go to people and I'd ask them things like, what did you do at the weekend? And which of those activities was most enjoyable? I'd ask them what they like doing. Then I might ask them, what comes to mind when you think about a museum? Is it quiet? Is it loud? Is it expensive? Is it cheap? If you were going to a museum, how would you get there? Do you drive? Do you park? Do you get the bus? I would ask lots of questions to understand their world, what they like, what they don't like, and then I build up a picture. I build up a picture that says when people have free time, they enjoy spending time with friends and families. They want to try and save money wherever possible. Museums are seen as boring, strict, dusty, expensive. And there's a disconnect between what people enjoy and what people perceive museums to be. This not only gives us a more truthful picture of the landscape, also gives us something a little bit more actionable. If we discover that people don't go to museums because they think they're expensive, then we need to campaign around lowering the cost of a museum visit. If people don't go to museums because they're serious or boring, we think about how we can make museums exciting and fun. We try and match up what we want them to do with what they're currently doing. So if you ask someone why they did something or why they didn't, you're probably going to end up with a lie because it's just too big a question to actually be asked. So that's evaluation cares and some of what you can and can't ask. Again, before I move on to the final section, I'll ask if there are any thoughts, comments, or questions on that. Yeah, again, they might not. I don't believe people to be maliciously lying. Uh, it's just that it's a difficult question for them to answer. So, yeah, giving people really straightforward questions can help. Deborah, your hand is up. Please do go ahead.
Sorry, me again. Just, yeah, coming back to this earlier, you said that we have to work on the assumption that people are telling the truth when we're talking about sort of conflicts of interest. So I'm feeling slightly conflicted now.
Yeah, so how would I explain that rationale? Yeah, well, there's a conflict there. The expert testimony is taken as truthful, but that should be a little bit more in depth than what we're getting here. So I guess what I do is I look at each statement and I initially consider it to be truthful, but I do ask, could there be any issue with that? And when I see something like that question, I think, well, does that match onto the other data? So let's say I had Dr. Walker's testimony. That's unlikely to be the singular piece of evidence that I've got. So I look at Dr. Walker's testimony and they say this is an absolutely fantastic exhibition. And then I look at the dwell time in the gallery and I realize it's terrible dwell time, that there's been fewer visitors, that actually the museum pulled the exhibition early, and I see a disconnect. And so I would then decide that Dr. Walker's testimony may have issues, and I'd explore that in more detail. When I get people's responses saying they've not had time, then initially I consider that to be truthful and it stands there. But then I start adding in the other pieces and I say, well, actually, there has been physical time in their day. They've spent time doing lots of other activities, and maybe there's a disconnect there. So that's how I rationalize it. I take each individual statement, assuming there is truth or there's no malicious intent there. But then when I compare it to other pieces of evidence, I try and find any disconnect. So actually, sometimes I ask a very, very similar question in two particular ways to examine if there is any disconnect, if that makes sense. So what I'm saying is, yes, assume that people are not maliciously lying, take that as truthful, but also have ways in which that evidence is kind of corroborated. So Dr. Walker's positive testimony combined with positive viewer responses, I'm happy. Dr. Walker's testimony compared with bad testimonials, disconnect, I'm unhappy. Visitors don't have time, but then they demonstrate that they have lots of other time for things that they consider equally important, disconnect, I'm not happy. Don't have time, are missing out on other things that they want to do, maybe I'm happy. So we'll look for corroborating evidence on each statement. Whew, that was a tough question, Deborah. Hopefully I got away with that answer. Thanks for posing it. Lida, your hand is up. Apologies if I'm mispronouncing your name as well. It's new to me.
Hi. No, that's exactly it. Thank you. Thanks for checking. Yeah, I just wanted to say, I think with the thing about the questions there and the lying or what have you, that it's kind of about just being careful that you're not setting up a question that forces somebody into not giving you quite the truth because you've given them too easy a way out. So you could inadvertently set up a situation where what you're getting back is not that truthful, so to speak.
Yeah, I absolutely. And that can go with question type. It can also do with how we format that question as well. If we are running an event and we go up in that event t-shirt with that event lanyard and we go up and say, have you had a great time? That can be leading people. If we're giving an anonymous survey, then maybe people have the flexibility to be more truthful as well. So it can be on the way we ask the question in terms of formatting that question. Also, how we present that question can be making situations difficult for people to tell the truth. Thanks for highlighting. Okay. Just checking on time. I'll just very, very quickly, because you do seem quite an evaluation geeky audience. You do, which I appreciate. And I'll just take you a little bit deeper into questions like this, since there's a bit of discussion around it, and show you a quick example. When we ask free text questions where people write in answers, you get a lot of data. Now, individual comments are kind of meaningless. As a standalone comment, it doesn't tell me a lot about my activity, but they can be really powerful. Let me show you very, very quickly how I deal with some of the data that I gather. Here, I've asked people what comes to mind when they think of chemistry. Simple question. What comes to mind when people think of chemistry? And here I've written out the responses. We've got things like the periodic table, medicine, I don't know, Mrs. Page, she was a great teacher. This is exactly what the Royal Society of Chemistry did. They went out and asked people, what comes to mind when you think of chemistry? And they got lots of responses, thousands. They then sit down and they read through them. And they start to look and see if any common themes are there. For example, if I read through all of these statements, I'll find that quite a lot of them will mention school memories. So let's colour them purple. Oh, I hated it. All the symbols and things. My teacher was awful. I was never any good at it at school. So I take all of these disparate data points and I start seeing some common themes emerging. I can then go back through the remaining data and I can look for other common themes. So in pink, I've coded things around experiments or science. In the mustard color, medicine. And you take all of this data, and then you're able to say, when we ask people what comes to mind when they think of chemistry, the dominant association is with school memories, as exemplified by Jacob, who said, my favourite subject in school. There are secondary associations with science and experiments, as exemplified by Margaret, who said, it's all about chemicals. It's quite dangerous, really. The third association is with medicine, as exemplified by Jake, who said, people that make drugs to help. This takes us into the realms of data that we can actually present. We've gathered in lots of comments. We look at the common responses. We group them. We say that 57% of people thought this, as exemplified by this statement. So this is what I'd encourage you to do with all your qualitative data, to group it into common themes. A very, very quick example of that there. Last section. The last section I want to take you through is the data capture methods, the ways that we can be listening to people. I said right at the start that it is much more than a survey. And here are a quick fire list of ways that we can listen to people. Let's start off with the creepiest, which is visitor tracking. If you go into a museum, you might see a person lurking near the door with a clipboard and a stopwatch. They'll be a visitor tracker. They'll have been given a number. Let's say it's 5. And they will count people coming through the door. 1 person, 2 people, 3 people, 4 people. 5th person through the door, start the stopwatch. And they follow that person through the museum the rest of the day. They write down what that person does. Now, this doesn't tell you why people behave in a particular way. If someone stares at a painting for 15 minutes, do they like it? Do they hate it? We don't know. But it does tell you about how people behave. For impact purposes, we might think about dwell time. How long does it normally take people to go through this gallery? Let's say it's 15 minutes. But in our display, the average dwell time is 27 minutes. People stay and connect with our work for longer than average. That might be a plus point. Now, it is ethically complex. Following people can be challenging, but it's standard practice. Also, bonus points if anyone knows why they choose the 5th person. Any ideas why? Oops. I'll tell you. To introduce a degree of randomization into their sample. Yes, exactly. We've got it in the chat box there. To avoid following the friendliest person and to introduce randomization, we give ourselves a number that we follow. This can be true for visitor trackers or for people going up and asking a survey. Don't go up and ask the friendliest person. Go up and ask the 5th person who passes a marker on the floor. Another way we can get data from people. If you're using social media platforms, look at the backstage analytic pages. This will tell you who you're connecting with, and you can match that on to your target demographic. Are you reaching the people you wanted to reach? The inbuilt features are okay. You can also get programs like Keyhole that are paid services to help track your social media use. Comment walls, graffiti walls. I like these. I like these because they're an activity that can also be used for evaluation purposes. Let's say we ask, this is based on the picture on the slide, 100 children to draw their favourite literary character. They like drawing on walls, and they create all these little pieces of artwork. We then take the paper down and we code what they've drawn. Telling me that Susan, age 9, drew Hermione is meaningless. I don't know who Susan is. But if you tell me that 57% of children drew a character from the Harry Potter universe, as exemplified by Susan, age 9, who drew Hermione, that's us starting to get into something that we can report. You can do them online or in person. Google Analytics. If you're doing web-based stuff, tell me about people's behavior online. Don't tell me that 200 people came to your website in June. Tell me 200 people came to your website in June, representing a 300% increase on the period before. That dwell time on the website has increased from 20 seconds to 2 minutes 40. Tell me about people's behavior. Comment cards. Little postcard sized things that ask 2, 3, 4 questions. Keep them short. And also, you don't have to ask every question to every person. Why not ask one person about who they are? Ask another person about what they know. Ask another person when they're leaving. Keep it all short. Now, if you separate out the questions that you ask, it does give you limitations on your reporting. So if we ask one person all of the questions, then we could know who Mrs. Costello is, what she knows, and what she thought when she left. But if we ask different people different questions, then all we can say is 50% of people who came were women. Most people who came thought this, and most people left thinking this. We're just not able to say that Mrs. Costello knew that and left thinking that if we separate them out. But in most cases, that's still okay. So we don't have to ask every question to every person. Focus groups. Never been easier because we can do them online. Bring people into a space and get them to explore a topic. Now, this is quite a big burden to people. If you're asking them to give up an hour of their time, you're going to have to think about how you're rewarding them for that contribution. So I would be thinking about paying people if I wanted to run a focus group. Live voting. Put a QR code on a screen, whether you're doing something virtually or in person. You can get them to use their mobile phones to give you data, and you'll be able to download a spreadsheet of how they answered following the event. Recordings. Hit record, ask people to share a few words. It can give you some nice qualitative data, but make sure you're capturing the relevant permissions from people if you're going to use that data after. Voting. Ask people questions, get them to vote on something. Bonus points if you keep the results hidden until people have voted. Imagine there was a running tally outside of polling stations on election days. It could bias how people vote. So keeping the results hidden until people have had their say can be quite important. Data mining. Who is talking about you and what are they saying about you? A retweet doesn't necessarily equal endorsement, but if people are saying nice things about you and celebrating your work, it's definitely worth saving them. Comments. If you're doing YouTube videos or webinars, ask and encourage people to comment as much as possible. And then you should know what's coming. Code the comments, group them into common themes. Tell me collectively what people think. Reviews. Find someone in a position of expertise or oversight. Bring them in, get them to experience your work and write up a reflection of it. For example, if you're working with schools, teachers are in a position of expertise and oversight. If a teacher is able to observe your work and say it is better than most other researchers, that's going to be a pretty good thing to write about. And so the last one, awards. Nominate yourself for things, try and win them. Find an award you'd like to win and start working towards it tomorrow. Getting an award is an external stamp of endorsement that says your work is of quality, and it will help you when it comes to reporting. And finally, a good old survey. They're overused, so make sure that you ask as few questions as possible, and also tell people why it matters. If you're giving them a survey, tell them how their responses will be used in future, how you're trying to help communities or give them better services, and that they can only do that if they use their voice. And I'd apply it to this session as well. If you've enjoyed this session, then let people know. Tell them why it was useful to you. If you've not enjoyed today's session, well done for sticking it out, but tell them why it didn't really work, why you didn't get what you were hoping from it. Because either way, they're listening. They want to get you the best possible help and support that they can, and they can only do that if you use your voice. And that's all I wanted to share with you about the world of evaluation.